I was doing my afternoon security check near the primate section when I heard the sound of twisting metal. At first, I thought it was just construction work from the new penguin habitat, but then I heard screaming. Not the playful screams of excited children, but real, terrified screaming. I grabbed my radio and ran toward the noise, and what I saw made my blood run cold. A massive silverback gorilla was standing in the middle of the main walkway, easily 300 pounds of pure muscle. Tourists were running in every direction. A woman dropped her purse and sprinted toward the exit. A man pulled his girlfriend behind a trash bin, and a group of teenagers scrambled up a nearby tree. The gorilla hadn't attacked anyone, but his size alone was enough to cause complete panic. I immediately called for backup and a tranquilizer team, then rushed to the gorilla enclosure to figure out what happened.
When I got there, I couldn't believe my eyes. The reinforced glass wall had a huge crack running through it, and one of the metal support beams was bent outward. I later learned that a delivery truck had accidentally backed into the outer structure that morning, weakening it just enough. Koko, our 12-year-old silverback, must have been testing the wall and pushed through when it finally gave way. I ran back toward the main area, following the direction people were running from. I spotted Koko near the flamingo pond, beating his chest and making loud warning sounds. He wasn't charging at anyone, just standing there, looking confused and agitated. Behind me, I could hear zoo staff shouting instructions to evacuate and the distant sound of police sirens approaching. Koko suddenly took off running again, not toward the exits where crowds had gathered, but toward the children's petting zoo area. My heart dropped. That section was always packed with families and little kids. I sprinted after him, speaking into my radio, giving his location, and begging the tranquilizer team to hurry. When I rounded the corner, I saw parents scooping up their children and running. Some kids were crying, and staff members were trying to herd everyone to safety. But then I saw something that made me freeze in my tracks. A small boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, was standing completely still near the goat enclosure. He wasn't running, wasn't crying, just standing there in his little red jacket and dinosaur backpack, staring at the enormous gorilla heading straight toward him. I screamed at him to run, to move, to do anything, but he didn't react. Other people were yelling too. Someone's phone was recording from behind a fence, and I could hear a woman screaming, "That's my son!" from somewhere behind me. Koko slowed down as he approached the boy, dropped to all fours, and moved closer, step by step. I was terrified, knowing that one wrong move, one frightened scream from the child could trigger a defensive attack. I held my breath, watching helplessly. But instead of panicking, the little boy did something incredible. He slowly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn, stuffed gorilla toy. He held it up toward Koko with both hands, like he was offering a gift. Then, in the smallest, softest voice, he said, "Are you looking for your friend?" What happened next I will remember for the rest of my life. The massive silverback stopped just inches from the boy, lowered his enormous head, and gently sniffed the stuffed toy. Then Koko sat down right there on the concrete path, reached out one huge hand, and carefully, so carefully, touched the toy with a single finger. The boy didn't flinch. He took a tiny step forward and placed the stuffed gorilla on the ground between them. Koko picked it up, held it close to his chest, and made a soft cooing sound, nothing like the aggressive roars from before. The boy smiled and said, "It's okay. You're scared too, aren't you?" By this time, the tranquilizer team had arrived, along with police, paramedics, and half the zoo staff. Everyone had their weapons ready, but I waved my arms frantically, signaling them not to shoot. The head veterinarian looked at me like I was crazy, but I pointed at the scene. The boy was now sitting cross-legged on the ground, and Koko was sitting across from him, still holding the stuffed toy, completely calm. I slowly walked toward them, my hands raised, speaking in the softest voice I could manage. I asked the boy if he was okay, and he nodded without taking his eyes off Koko. I asked him his name, and he said it was Oliver. I crouched down several feet away and asked Oliver if he could tell me what was going on. The gorilla didn't move, just sat there, watching us both with surprisingly gentle eyes. Oliver explained, in that matter-of-fact way that children do, that his big brother had been sick in the hospital for a long time. He had something wrong with his heart and had to have surgery. Oliver's mom had brought him to the zoo today because his brother finally came home yesterday and they wanted to celebrate. His brother loved gorillas more than anything in the world. He collected stuffed gorillas, watched documentaries about them, and always said that when he grew up, he wanted to help protect them in the wild. 2 months ago, when his brother was having a really bad day in the hospital, Oliver's mom bought him a new stuffed gorilla from the hospital gift shop to cheer him up. His brother loved it and kept it with him during his surgery. Yesterday, when they brought his brother home, he gave the stuffed gorilla to Oliver and told him, "Now you have to protect the gorillas for me until I'm strong enough to do it myself." Oliver brought the toy to the zoo today to show the real gorillas, to feel closer to his brother. When he saw Koko, scared and confused, he just knew that the gorilla needed a friend, just like his brother needed friends when he was scared in the hospital.
I sat there, listening to this little boy, trying not to cry. Behind me, I could hear people whispering. Some were filming, and Oliver's mother was crying quietly, being held back by security, but watching her son with a mixture of terror and pride. I made a decision then. I asked Oliver if he thought Koko would follow us back to his home if Oliver walked with us. Oliver looked at the giant gorilla and asked, "Koko, do you want to go home now?" As if he understood every word, Koko stood up, still clutching the stuffed toy, and took a step toward the direction of his enclosure. What happened next was surreal. Oliver stood up, brushed off his pants, and started walking back toward the primate area. Koko walked beside him, knuckles on the ground, the tiny stuffed gorilla toy looking ridiculous in his massive hand. I walked on the other side, and behind us came a slow procession of zoo staff, police officers, veterinarians with tranquilizer guns, and a crowd of onlookers keeping a safe distance. The walk back felt like it took forever, but it was probably only 5 minutes. When we reached the enclosure, the maintenance team had already set up a temporary entrance through the back area. Oliver stopped at the entrance and turned to Koko. He said, "You have to go back now, but you can keep the gorilla. It'll help you feel brave, just like it helped my brother." Koko looked at the boy for a long moment, then gently placed the stuffed toy on the ground and pushed it back toward Oliver with one finger. Then Koko reached out and softly patted the top of Oliver's head, just once, so gently it barely moved his hair. After that, Koko turned and walked back into his enclosure without any fuss, no resistance, just a calm walk back home. The moment he was inside, staff secured the entrance and everyone seemed to exhale at once. Oliver picked up the stuffed toy, hugged it tight, and his mother finally broke through the crowd and swept him into her arms, sobbing. The police wanted to question everyone, zoo officials wanted statements, and the press had somehow already arrived and were shouting questions. But I made sure Oliver and his mother were escorted to a quiet office first, away from all the chaos. I brought them water and crackers, and we just sat there for a while, letting the adrenaline fade. I asked Oliver's mother, whose name was Sarah, if she could tell me more about her older son. She pulled out her phone and showed me pictures. His name was Ethan. He was 9 years old, and he had been born with a serious heart defect. He had undergone 3 surgeries in his short life, the most recent one just 3 weeks ago. The doctor said this last surgery should fix the problem, but recovery would take months. Ethan had spent nearly half his life in and out of hospitals, and through it all, his obsession with gorillas had been his escape. He read books about Dian Fossey, watched nature documentaries, and told everyone that gorillas were the strongest, gentlest animals on Earth. Sarah said that Ethan had been following Koko's story for years, had read every article about him, and had visited him at the zoo at least a dozen times. I felt chills run down my spine. I asked Sarah when Ethan had last visited the zoo, and she thought for a moment before saying it was about 8 months ago, right before his condition got worse and he had to be hospitalized for the pre-surgery preparations. I made a decision then that I hoped wouldn't get me fired. I told Sarah to wait, and I went straight to the director's office. I explained everything that had happened, and then I made a request that seemed impossible.
I asked if Ethan could have a private visit with Koko, something beyond the normal visitor experience, a chance to truly connect with the gorilla who had been so gentle with his little brother.
The director was hesitant, rattling off insurance concerns, safety protocols, and liability issues. But I pressed harder. I told him this little boy had just saved us from a potential tragedy, that his bravery had kept Koko calm and prevented anyone from getting hurt. I told him about Ethan's story, his surgeries, his love for gorillas, and how he might never get another chance like this if his health took a turn. After what felt like an eternity, the director agreed, but with strict conditions. It would have to be supervised by senior staff, the head veterinarian, and Koko's primary keeper, a woman named Dr. Lisa Chen, who had worked with him since he was young. It could only happen if Dr. Chen felt Koko was calm enough and Ethan's doctors approved the visit. 2 weeks later, everything was arranged. Ethan's doctors cleared him for the visit as long as he took it easy and didn't overexert himself. We scheduled it for early morning, before the zoo opened, so there would be no crowds. When the family arrived, I met them at the front gate. Ethan was thin and pale, with a healing scar visible at the collar of his shirt, but his eyes were bright with excitement. Oliver held his hand on one side, and Sarah walked on the other, carrying a bag of medical supplies just in case. Dr. Chen met us at the primate area and explained how the visit would work. We would go into a special observation area that had reinforced glass separating us from Koko's enclosure, but there was also a secured section where Dr. Chen could be in the same space as Koko if he remained calm. She had been working with him since the escape, doing extra trust-building exercises, and she
Easy
felt
now,
confident
Koko.
he would be receptive. We all put on safety vests and signed the required waivers, and then we entered the observation room. Koko was sitting on a large platform in his enclosure, eating a banana. When he saw Dr. Chen, he made a happy huffing sound and knuckle-walked over to the glass. Dr. Chen introduced Ethan, speaking in a calm, steady voice, telling Koko that this was a special friend who had come to visit him. Koko looked at Ethan with curious eyes, tilted his head, and then did something unexpected. He picked up a piece of fruit and gently placed it against the glass, right at Ethan's eye level, like he was offering to share. Ethan laughed, tears running down his face, and placed his hand on the glass. Koko placed his enormous hand on the other side, and they stayed like that for several seconds. Dr. Chen then asked if Ethan wanted to try something special. She explained that she could open the secure door and allow supervised interaction if everyone felt comfortable. Sarah looked terrified, but Ethan begged, and after a long moment, she nodded. Dr. Chen opened the door and stepped into the enclosure, and Koko immediately moved to her side, calm and obedient. She signaled for Ethan to slowly step through, with me and another staff member positioned right at the door, ready to pull him back if anything went wrong. Ethan took small, careful steps, and when he was about 6 feet from Koko, he stopped. He said in a shaky voice, "Hi, Koko. My name is Ethan. Thank you for being nice to my little brother." Koko sat down, making himself smaller, less intimidating. Dr. Chen gave a subtle nod, and Ethan took another step forward, then another. When he was just a few feet away, Koko reached out slowly and touched Ethan's shoulder, gentle as could be. Ethan broke down crying, but he was smiling through the tears. He told Koko about all the books he'd read, all the documentaries he'd watched, and how he had dreamed his whole life of meeting a real gorilla. Koko listened, making soft sounds, and at one point he wrapped one long arm around Ethan in something that looked remarkably like a hug. We let them stay like that for 10 minutes, which felt like both forever and not nearly long enough. When it was time to leave, Ethan thanked Koko over and over, and Koko watched him walk back through the door, those intelligent eyes following his every move.
As we exited the enclosure, Sarah hugged Dr. Chen and thanked her through sobs, and Oliver gave a little wave, which the gorilla seemed to acknowledge with a bob of his head. Over the next few months, the zoo set up a special program inspired by Ethan's visit. We partnered with children's hospitals to bring kids who were sick or recovering from serious illnesses to have safe, supervised experiences with our animals, particularly the gorillas. Ethan became a regular visitor, coming once a month when his health allowed. Each time, Koko would recognize him, would come to the glass, and they would sit together. Ethan started a blog documenting his visits, talking about gorilla conservation and raising awareness about protecting endangered species. His story went viral, and donations poured in, both for the zoo's conservation programs and for the hospital that had saved his life. 1 year after the escape, the zoo held a special ceremony. We unveiled a new educational center dedicated to great ape conservation, funded largely by donations that came in after Ethan's story spread. The center was named the Oliver and Ethan Courage Center, honoring both boys, one for his bravery in a moment of crisis, and the other for his lifelong passion and resilience. Both boys were there for the ribbon cutting, standing beside a life-size bronze statue of a silverback gorilla with a small child placing a hand on its shoulder. Koko's enclosure was also renovated with the funds, expanded to 3 times its original size, with climbing structures, a waterfall, and naturalistic features that made it feel more like his ancestral home in the African forests. Dr. Chen said he was never happier, more relaxed, and more engaged. And every time Ethan visited, Koko would drop whatever he was doing and come to greet him, pressing his huge hand against the glass where Ethan's small hand waited. Ethan's health continued to improve. His doctors were amazed by his progress, and while they credited the successful surgery, Sarah always said that having something to live for, a purpose and a passion, had been just as important as any medical intervention. Ethan started volunteering at the zoo as soon as he was old enough, helping with educational programs, giving tours, and talking to other sick children about his experiences. Oliver, now older and still carrying that same worn stuffed gorilla, often joined him. As for me, I still work at the zoo, and I still think about that day constantly. The day a terrified gorilla escaped, and a brave little boy reminded all of us that sometimes the smallest act of kindness, the simplest gesture of understanding, can change everything. Koko taught us that these magnificent animals aren't monsters to be feared, but intelligent, emotional beings capable of gentleness and connection. And Oliver and Ethan taught us that courage isn't about being afraid. It's about doing the right thing, even when you are afraid. Every morning when I do my rounds, I stop by Koko's enclosure. He's usually still sleeping, curled up in his nest of blankets, but sometimes he's awake, sitting on his favorite platform, looking out at the sunrise. And I swear, in those quiet moments, he looks peaceful, content, like he knows he's exactly where he belongs, surrounded by people who care about him, and forever connected to the 2 brothers who showed him that humans can be kind, brave, and full of love.